On a scorching August afternoon in 1912, 4-year-old Bobby Dunbar slipped away in the Louisiana swamps and a nation held its breath. 8 months later, a boy turns up with a drifter in Mississippi. The Dunbars believe he's their son. Another mother insists that he is hers. A sensational courtroom showdown ensues, locking in a heartbreaking verdict. Decades pass and the boy leads a seemingly normal life, but in 2004, modern DNA science shatters that illusion, exposing a century-old tragedy. What we thought was a triumphant reunion was in truth a stolen identity. This is the Bobby Dunbar case, a tale of loss, deception, and the irreversible cost of a single mistake. 1912, St. Landry Parish, Louisiana. A family lakeside outing turns into every parent's worst nightmare. Robert Clarence Bobby Dunbar, just 4 years old, born May 23, 1908 to parents Leslie and Percy in Opelousas, Louisiana, vanishes on August 23 during a fishing trip at Swayze Lake. Their party consisted of 11 family members and friends. On that particular morning, Percy had to leave for work, which greatly upset young Bobby, who angrily broke the strap on his straw hat. While his mother was cooking some food, family friend Paul Measy took Bobby, who he nicknamed Heavy, his older brother Alonzo, and some of the other children for a walk to the lake to shoot some fish. It was around noon when they were called back for lunch. At this point, Paul put Alonzo on his shoulders and joked to Bobby, quote, "Get out of the way, Heavy, or I'll run you over," end quote. To which Bobby replied, quote, "You can't do it, you ain't no bigger than me," end quote. Paul was the last person to see Bobby Dunbar. Upon returning to the camp, Paul was with the children, but there were no signs of Bobby, which sent his mother into a panic. She began screaming for her son before fainting. The group searched far and wide for the lost child, heading towards Percy's work, believing that he may have attempted to find his father, but there were no signs of him. As nightfall approached, the lake was even searched, but there was nothing. Divers entered the lake, checking any coves where he could have fallen into and gotten stuck, but they only recovered the body of a dead deer. They dragged the lake and used dynamite in case his remains were trapped, but there was nothing. One theory that lingered for a while was that he was eaten by one of the local alligators, so these animals were even cut open, trying desperately to find any signs of Bobby Dunbar, but again they found nothing. The vital clue was going to be his broken straw hat. An experiment was conducted to see how long it would float on a lake, and it did so for hours, which rules out that he drowned in the lake as it couldn't be found. There were no signs of it or the boy anywhere, though they did find a set of footprints heading to a railroad bridge heading out of the swamp. A $1,000 reward snowballed into $6,000 as the nationwide search efforts ensued, involving 500 people. Percy headed to New Orleans personally, handing out hundreds of flyers trying desperately to locate his son. Quote, "Age 4 years and 4 months, full size for age, stout but not fat, large round blue eyes, light hair and very fair skin with rosy cheeks. Left foot had been burned when a baby and shows a scar on the big toe which is somewhat smaller than big toe on the right foot. Wore blue rompers and straw hat without shoes," end quote. It wasn't until April 1913 when authorities located and arrested itinerant handyman William Cantwell Walters, who tuned pianos and church organs. He had been seen travelling across Mississippi with a young boy matching Bobby's description. He was even spotted whipping the child and often gave inconsistent answers as to who he belonged to from various different family members. Eventually, Walters claimed that the boy was Charles Bruce Anderson, who people referred to by his middle name, the son of Julia Anderson, his brother's mistress, and a field hand for his family who he claimed gave him custody of the boy. However, when Walters was brought in, the boy refused to answer to the name Bobby. Regardless, the Dunbars were summoned to identify him. Although the eyewitness accounts differ. One report says the boy cried out for his mother unless he fainted. Another says that she hesitated, unsure if it was him or not. Conflicting accounts also emerged about whether Bobby recognised his brother Alonzo. Some say he had no recollection of him, others say he embraced him, called out his name and gave him a kiss. It was the next day during a bath when Leslie noticed some moles and a burn scar matching the real Bobby Dunbar, declaring him to be her son. He was presented back to the Dunbars, who returned home with him, causing the town to throw a celebratory parade showering him with gifts. However, on May 1st, 1913, Julia Anderson then travelled from North Carolina to Opelousas, asserting that the boy was her son Bruce, taken by Walters supposedly for a short trip to visit relatives, but maintained that she didn't give him custody as he had claimed. Quote, Walters left Barnesville, North Carolina with my son Charles Bruce in February of 1912, saying that he only wanted to take the child with him for a few days on a visit to the home of his sister. I have not seen the child from that day to this. I did not give him the child. I merely consented for him to take my son for a few days. End quote. This now put Walters in a precarious position. If this boy wasn't Bobby Dunbar, he technically had permission to have the child in his possession. If it was Bobby Dunbar, he was going to be charged with kidnapping, and in Louisiana at the time, this could lead to the death penalty. This concluded with Walters writing to the Dunbar family personally. Quote, I know by now you have decided. You are wrong. It is very likely I will lose my life on account of that, and if I do, the great God will hold you accountable. End quote. Julie was brought in to identify the child and was presented with 5 different boys all of the same age, including the one given to the Dunbars. The child showed no indication that he recognised her. Julia did ask if he was the one but wasn't given an answer, and she remained unsure if it was her son or not. It's worth noting that her son Bruce had now been missing for 15 months at this point. The next day after undressing him, Julia recognised true physical features, but news of her hesitation and stigma over her children born out of wedlock diminished her credibility. Even before she arrived, the townsfolk had already relished in Bobby's return and had decided that he was a Dunbar. Julia was dubbed an illiterate and a prostitute, and it was revealed that she had given up her previous daughter for adoption and had also been wrongfully blamed for her other daughter's death. She didn't have the money to sustain a long court battle for her supposed son, so sadly she returned home to North Carolina without the person she claimed to have been her child, while the public believed that she was a complete liar. Quote, she had not seen her son since February of 1912. She had forgotten him. Animals don't forget, but this big, coarse country woman, several times a mother, she forgot. End quote. Walters was extradited to Louisiana, tried, and convicted of kidnapping. Anderson did return for the trial, attesting his innocence and maintaining that the boy was Bruce. This was worsened when many residents of Poplarville, Mississippi confirmed to have seen Walters with the young boy even before the 1912 Bobby Dunbar disappearance. Despite her testimony, the court ruled in the Dunbars' favour, concluding that he was in fact Bobby. Walters was sentenced to life for kidnapping, while the child was returned home with the Dunbars, though Walters only ended up serving 2 years before the conviction was successfully appealed. Due to the excessive funds spent for the first trial, the prosecutors decided to not retry him and he was released. After the trial, Julia decided to settle in Poplarville, Mississippi, where she married and raised 7 children, became a devout Christian, founded a church, and served as a midwife and nurse. Her family insisted that she led a happy life, but always maintained that her son Bruce had been kidnapped by the Dunbars. She passed away on February 1st, 1940, and was buried at Fords Creek Cemetery, having never received closure about the truth of her son. After the trial, Walters went on to live a reclusive life, before passing away on April 7th, 1945 in Pueblo, Colorado. His family claimed that he always professed innocence, right up until his final breath. The boy raised as Bobby Dunbar remained in Opelousas before growing up to marry his teenage sweetheart Marjorie, having 4 kids and running a gas station. In 1954, his son asked if he truly was Bobby, to which he replied, quote, I know who I am, and nothing else makes a difference. End quote. He passed away on March 8th, 1966 and was buried in Bellevue Memorial Park. His widow followed in 1994 and was buried next to her husband. But this tragic and seemingly resolved story was about to take a drastic turn nearly 90 years later. 1999. One of the supposed Bobby Dunbar's granddaughters, Margaret Dunbar Cutright, decided to launch her own investigation, examining media archives, interviewing Anderson's children, and compiling trial documents. Her goal was to finally prove once and for all that her grandfather was in fact a Dunbar, but unfortunately this didn't produce the results that she had hoped for. She was given an intense scrapbook by her father, including various newspaper articles on the case. Quote, the scrapbook was like a jigsaw puzzle without the picture on the box, and over the next few months I lost myself in trying to piece it together. End quote. This was when Margaret began to notice the inconsistencies between different newspaper articles regarding Nessie's reactions to meeting the small boy. Originally, the Dunbars said that the child didn't look like Bobby at all and that his eyes were too small. Julia's granddaughter Linda Tarver described her childhood, quote, "All of us cousins grew up. We knew that we had an uncle that had been taken by the Dunbar family in Opelousas, Louisiana. We always said kidnapped. We said they kidnapped him," end quote. Many of Margaret's family urged her to leave the past behind, including the alleged Bobby's own son, Gerald. Quote, "No matter how it turns out, there's going to be a sense of loss. What is to be truly gained?" End quote. 2004. An Associated Press reporter approached the family, and Bobby Jr. consented to a DNA test, comparing his DNA with his father's nephew, his cousin, Alonzo Dunbar's son. And it concluded that they were not blood related, proving finally that the man raised as Bobby Dunbar was not actually the real deal. Quote, "My intent was to prove that we were Dunbars. The results didn't turn out that way and I've had to do some readjusting of my thinking, but I would do it again." End quote. Margaret admitted that this relieved the family of Julia Anderson as they finally got their truth, while she received criticism from the Dunbars as they had always accepted that he was one of them. However, it's worth noting that while this proves he wasn't Bobby Dunbar, it doesn't necessarily prove that he was Bruce Anderson either. Julia's son Hollis did show interest in submitting his own DNA for a test to finally complete the puzzle, but he passed away before this could be done and it still remains a mystery. It only continued in 2008 when one of the supposed Bobby Dunbar's sons, Gerald, remembered a family trip back in 1963 when they passed through Poplarville and his father informed him, quote, "Those are the people they came to pick me up from," end quote. But the question remains, if the boy in the trial wasn't Bobby Dunbar, what happened to the real one? Margaret believed that the real boy most likely drowned in the lake or was eaten by an alligator, but as explained, no body was ever found or recovered in the lake or inside the animals' stomachs. Back in 1932, the supposed Bobby Dunbar was now an adult and he remembered a faint memory of being on the road with Walters and witnessing another young boy falling off their wagon and dying. It's possible that this was the real Bobby Dunbar, and it could also explain the young child unintentionally taking on the persona of Bobby himself without realizing. But Walters always fought for his own innocence. A century-long illusion built on desperate hope, courtroom drama and newspaper spectacle, culminating in a twist only modern genetics could deliver. Bobby Dunbar's true fate remains a haunting mystery, but Bruce Anderson's story, long suppressed, possibly found its voice. In unraveling the tangled threads of two families, this case teaches us identity isn't just what we're told. It's who the past says we are, even if that past forever leaves us seeking answers.